Hello, English learners, and welcome to Story-Driven English. Get ready for a wild ride today, because we're tackling a story that's got it all. Political intrigue, constitutional showdowns, and a whole lot of heated debate. We're talking about President Trump's mission to abolish the Department of Education, whether you're pro-Trump, anti-Trump, or somewhere in between. This story is packed with powerful vocabulary, complex sentence structures, and a fascinating glimpse into the American political system. Let's jump in. The Department of Education's hilariously predictable demise, a Trumpian comedy of errors and triumphs. Once upon a time, in the swampy land of Washington, D.C., there existed a monstrous beast known as the Department of Education. Though it was a creature of legend, whispered about in hushed tones by terrified parents and overburdened taxpayers. This bureaucratic behemoth, they said, gobbled up billions of dollars and spewed out reams of regulations, all while American students somehow still couldn't find their way out of a paper bag, let alone locate Vietnam on a map. Then, like a knight in shining red MAGA hot armor, came President Donald J. Trump, a man who knew a bad deal when he saw one. And the dough, well, that was the ultimate bad deal. It was like buying a used car with a blown engine, a leaky roof, and a family of raccoons living in the trunk, and then being told you had to pay for the raccoons' college tuition. This is ridiculous. Trump probably exclaimed, "We weren't there, but it's a safe bet. We're spending more money on education than any other country. And our kids are ranking somewhere between slightly confused and utterly clueless on international tests. It's time to drain the swamp, the educational swamp." And so began the Great Department of Education takedown. A saga filled with more twists and turns than a Common Core math problem, which, let's be honest, is pretty twisted. Act 1. The Declaration of Independence from Federal Overreach. Trump, never one for subtlety, made his intentions crystal clear. He didn't just hint at dismantling the dough. He shouted it from the rooftops and probably tweeted it in all caps. He called it a waste, a disaster, and probably a few other choice words that would make a sailor blush, but would make a MAGA rally roar with approval. His argument was simple, elegant, and resonated with millions of Americans who felt like their local schools were being run by out-of-touch bureaucrats in D.C. Why should some faceless pencil pusher in Washington decide what little Timmy learns in Topeka? Shouldn't that be up to Timmy's parents, his teachers, and maybe even Timmy himself if he's feeling particularly ambitious? Trump's main beef was that education should be local. States' rights, baby. Remember the Constitution. Liberals sometimes forget, he believed, and rightly so, that the folks in Boise know a heck of a lot more about what's good for Idaho kids than some Ivy League-educated expert who's probably never even seen a potato farm. The beauty of Trump's approach was its sheer audacity. He didn't tiptoe around the issue. He charged at it like a bull in a china shop. A china shop filled with overpriced, underperforming, and overly woke educational programs. Act 2, the Executive Order, aka the "You're Fired" decree in March of 2025. Trump put his money where his mouth was, or, more accurately, his pen where his policy was. He signed an executive order that essentially told the dough, "Pack your bags, you're outta here." Now, this wasn't some spur-of-a-moment decision. This was the culmination of years of Trumpian frustration with the federal government's meddling. In education, he'd seen the test scores, he'd heard the complaints from parents, and he'd probably even tried to help Barron with his homework, which, we can only imagine, was a truly terrifying experience. The executive order was a masterpiece of Trumpian simplicity. It didn't get bogged down in bureaucratic jargon. It cut straight to the chase. It basically said, "Linda McMahon, you're the last Secretary of Education. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, and you really don't have a choice, is to shut this whole thing down." Linda, bless her heart, was presented as the hopefully last secretary. Talk about a tough gig. It's like being named the captain of the Titanic after it hit the iceberg. But hey, at least she got a front row seat to the greatest dismantling of a federal agency since ever. The order also emphasized that the core needs would be taken care of. Pell Grants, still there. Title I funding, safe and sound. Support for students with disabilities, absolutely. Trump wasn't about to leave anyone hanging. He just wanted to get the federal government's grubby hands off the steering wheel and let the states take control. The federal government's role would be reduced to that of a friendly and well-funded ATM. But, and this is where it gets really juicy, the order also took a big, beautiful swing at all that gender ideology and day nonsense that had been creeping into schools like kudzu on a southern mansion. Trump, a man who knows a thing or two about winning, recognized that this stuff was a losing proposition. It was divisive, distracting, and frankly, just plain weird. He was basically saying, let's focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic, not pronouns and privilege walks. Act 3. The resistance, aka the liberal meltdown, of course. No Trumpian triumph would be complete without a healthy dose of liberal outrage. And boy, did they deliver. The mainstream media went into full-blown panic mode. CNN anchors practically fainted on live television. MSNBC pundits shrieked about the end of civilization as we know it. The New York Times probably dedicated an entire issue to lamenting the demise of the dough, complete with tear-stained op-eds from tenured professors who had never actually set foot in a public school. They cried, "But what about the children?" as if Trump was planning to lock them all in a room with nothing but Fox News and coloring books. They wailed, "But what about equity?" as if the dough had actually achieved equity in its decades of existence. They moaned, "But what about the regulations?" as if anyone actually liked regulations. The resistance was predictable, pathetic, and frankly, pretty entertaining. It was like watching a group of toddlers throw a tantrum because they couldn't have another cookie. They had gotten so used to the federal government controlling every aspect of education that the thought of giving power back to the states was simply unthinkable. But Trump, being Trump, didn't back down. He doubled down. He tripled down. He probably tweeted about it at 3 a.m. while eating a cheeseburger. He knew he was on the right side of history and the right side of the American people. Act 4. The preemptive strikes weakening the beast. Before the official closing time bell even rang, the Trump administration was already hard at work dismantling the dough from the inside out. It was like a controlled demolition, strategically weakening the structure before bringing the whole thing crashing down. First, they went after the personnel. Massive layoffs at the Office of Federal Student Aid and the Office for Civil Rights. It was a bloodbath, a bureaucratic bloodbath, that is. No actual blood was spilled probably, but plenty of pink slips were handed out. Then, they used the dough's own powers against it. They launched investigations into schools and universities that were pushing woke agendas. They threatened to withhold funding from institutions that were promoting anti-American or anti-Semitic ideologies. They basically said, if you want to play the woke game, you're going to have to do it on your own dime. This was classic Trump, bold, brash, and unapologetically effective. He was using the system to dismantle the system. It was like using a wrecking ball to demolish a building, while still living inside the building. Risky, maybe. Entertaining. Absolutely. Act 5. The grand finale, or is it? So, will Trump succeed in completely obliterating the Department of Education? It's a battle that's still being fought. The Democrats in Congress will put up a fight, of course. They'll try to block legislation, stall nominations, and generally make life difficult for the Trump administration. The courts will also get involved. There will be lawsuits, injunctions, and endless legal wrangling. It'll be a lawyer's paradise and a taxpayer's nightmare. But here's the thing. Trump has already won. He's changed the conversation. He's exposed the dough for what it is, a bloated, inefficient, and ideologically driven bureaucracy that has failed American students for far too long. Even if the dough survives in some zombie-like form, it will be a shadow of its former self. Its power will be diminished, its budget slashed, and its influence curtailed. The states will have more control, parents will have more say, and schools will hopefully start focusing on actual education again. And that, my friends, is a victory worth celebrating. It's a victory for common sense, for local control, and for the future of American education. It's a victory for everyone who believes that the best way to improve our schools is to get the federal government out of the classroom and let teachers teach, parents parent, and students learn. So raise a glass of whatever beverage you prefer. Trump probably wouldn't judge, unless it's a soy latte, to the impending demise of the Department of Education. It's been a long time coming, and it's a beautiful thing to behold. It's a true Trumpian triumph, a hilarious, chaotic, and ultimately profoundly American story. And who knows, maybe one day they'll even make a movie about it. It'll be a comedy, of course, a very, very funny comedy, with lots of winning act. 3. The case for freedom. From bureaucracy, bad ideas, wasted money, and left-wing lunacy. It's time to expose the Department of Education for the bloated, freedom-squashing, money-guzzling, woke-infested swamp monster that it truly is. We're not just talking about a minor trim here, folks. We're talking about a full-blown you're fired, level demolition. And frankly, it's about time. 1. The bureaucracy behemoth. A colossal waste of time, money, and sanity, if you will. A creature so vast, so convoluted, so utterly incomprehensible that it makes the IRS look like a lemonade stand. That, my friends, is the Department of Education. It's a labyrinth of regulations, a mountain of paperwork, and an army of bureaucrats whose sole purpose in life seems to be to make the lives of teachers, parents, and students a living hell. It's like the government took all the worst parts of a DMV, a post office, and a Kafka novel, and mashed them together into one giant, soul-crushing entity. And then they gave it a budget of billions of dollars. Trump, a man who built an empire on efficiency and gold-plated everything, took one look at this bureaucratic monstrosity and probably had a seizure. He's a builder, a doer, a guy who gets things done. He's not about to waste his time or your tax dollars on a department that's more interested in filling out forms than educating children. We are talking about a $1.6 trillion student loan portfolio that is so badly managed that it would make a loan shark blush. This isn't just incompetence, folks. It is bordering on criminal. And who is paying the price? Our kids, saddled with debt they may never get out of. And the results? Don't even get me started. We're spending more per student than almost any other developed nation. And what do we have to show for it? Test scores that are flatter than a pancake, graduation rates that are lower than a limbo champion, and a generation of kids who can't tell the difference between George Washington and George Costanza. It's a national disgrace. It is like paying for a 5-star meal and getting served a plate of cold, congealed gruel. 2. The woke indoctrination factory, turning our schools into social justice boot camps. But the waste of money is just the tip of the iceberg. The real problem with the dough is what they're doing with all that cash. They're not just wasting it, they're using it to poison the minds of our children. The dough has become a hotbed of radical, left-wing ideology. They're pushing critical race theory, which teaches kids to hate their country and see everything through the lens of race. They're obsessed with gender ideology, confusing kids about basic biology and forcing them to use pronouns that would make Shakespeare roll over in his grave. And they're drowning our schools in day initiatives that prioritize diversity over merit, equity over excellence, and inclusion over actual learning. It's like they're deliberately trying to turn our schools into social justice boot camps, where the only things being taught are victimhood, grievance, and how to properly virtue signal on social media. They are not preparing our children to be productive, functioning adults. Trump, a man who believes in American exceptionalism and isn't afraid to say it, saw this woke onslaught for what it was: a direct assault on our values, our culture, and the very fabric of our society. He knew that if we didn't stop this madness, we'd lose our country. He was basically saying, we're not going to let a bunch of unelected bureaucrats turn our kids into woke zombies. 3. Give us back our schools. The case for local control and parental rights. Let's talk about a little thing called the Constitution. You know, that document that's supposed to guarantee our freedoms and limit the power of the federal government? Well, nowhere in that document does it say that Washington, D.C. should be running our schools. The Founding Fathers, in their infinite wisdom, understood that education is best handled at the local level. They knew that parents and communities know what's best for their children, not some distant, out-of-touch bureaucrat who probably hasn't seen the inside of a public school since the Carter administration. The federal government has, over time, crept into the system like a slow-growing cancer, eroding the control of local districts, parents, and teachers. They are like that annoying relative that comes to visit and just won't leave. Trump, a fierce defender of states' rights and individual liberty, wanted to restore the balance of power. He wanted to empower parents, to give them a voice in their children's education, and to make sure that local communities were in charge of their own schools. It's a revolutionary idea, I know, but it's actually how things are supposed to work in a republic. It's called freedom, folks. Remember that. For the dismal report card, the Dew's legacy of failure, it's be brutally honest. The Department of Education has been an abject failure. Since its creation in 1979, test scores have stagnated, graduation rates have barely budged, and our kids have fallen further and further behind their international counterparts. It's like they've been running on a treadmill for 40 years, going nowhere fast. They've tried everything, No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, Common Core. It's been one failed program after another, each one more expensive and less effective than the last. It is a classic case of throwing good money after bad, and we, the taxpayers, are the ones footing the bill. Trump, a man who knows a thing or two about success and failure, looked at the Dew's pathetic track record and said, "Enough is enough. This experiment has failed. It's time to pull the plug." 5. The Patriots Assemble. The growing movement to abolish the Dewbot Trump wasn't a lone wolf in this fight. He had a whole pack of patriots howling at the moon right alongside him. Organizations like the Heritage Foundation, with their Project 2025, were laying out the blueprint for dismantling the Dew. Groups like Moms for Liberty were mobilizing parents to take back their schools from the woke mob. And conservative leaders across the country were rallying to the cause. This wasn't just some fringe movement. It was a groundswell of support from everyday Americans who were fed up with the federal government's overreach in education. They were tired of seeing their tax dollars wasted, their children indoctrinated, and their local schools turned into social justice laboratories. This is the power of the American people, folks. When we get riled up, when we decide that enough is enough, we can move mountains. And in this case, we're about to move a mountain of bureaucratic nonsense right out. Of Washington, D.C., the final verdict: it's time for a revolution in education. So, there you have it, folks. The case for abolishing the Department of Education is overwhelming. It's about fiscal responsibility, it's about parental rights, it's about local control, and most importantly, it's about the future of our children. The ultimate outsider, the man who dared to challenge the establishment, saw the Dew for the swamp creature that it was, and he wasn't afraid to call it out. He's leading the charge to drain the educational swamp, to liberate our schools from the clutches of the federal government, and to restore common sense to our education system. This isn't just about politics. It's about principle. It's about reclaiming our freedom, our values, and our future. It's about making American education great again. And with Trump leading the way, we're going to do just that. It's going to be a glorious, hilarious, and utterly unforgettable victory. Get ready for the fireworks, folks, because this is going to be one for the history books. The Department of Education is going down. Act 4. The Wailing and Gnashing of Teeth, the Liberal Lament, Extended Edition. Oh, the pearl-clutching, the hand-wringing, the sheer, unadulterated melodrama of the left's reaction to Trump's plan to dismantle the Department of Education. You'd think he'd announced plans to replace school lunches with broccoli and kale, smoothies, judging by the level of outrage. They are acting as if he is taking a chainsaw to the very fabric of American society. The liberal establishment, the mainstream media, and the usual assortment of woke activists have gone into full-blown panic mode, spewing forth a torrent of hyperbole, misinformation, and outright lies. It's a spectacle to behold, really. It's like watching a flock of seagulls fighting over a dropped French fry. Noisy, messy, and ultimately pointless. Let's break down their flimsy arguments, one by one, shall we? 1. The vulnerable student's shield. Hiding behind the children, as usual, the centerpiece of the anti-abolishment argument is the claim that dismantling the Dew will somehow magically transform America's schools into dystopian hellscapes, where minority children, low-income students, and students with disabilities are left to fend for themselves. It's the classic liberal tactic. Use the most vulnerable members of society as a shield. To protect their own power and privilege, they shriek about the potential demise of Pell Grants, Title I funding, and the individuals with disabilities education. Act idea, painting a picture of utter chaos and despair. They conveniently ignore the fact that these programs have existed for decades, under the Dew's watch, and yet the very disparities they claim to care about are still rampant. It's like blaming the weatherman for a hurricane. The dough, with all its billions and all of its bureaucrats, hasn't fixed it. So, obviously, more dough is the answer. That's sarcasm, folks, in case you missed it. Trump, being the shrewd businessman that he is, saw through this charade. He explicitly stated that these essential programs would be preserved and that the funding would be redirected to the states. He's not advocating for abandoning vulnerable students. He's advocating for a more efficient and effective way to help them. He is cutting out the middleman. The underlying assumption of the vulnerable students argument is that state and local governments are inherently incapable of caring for their own children. It's an insult to the millions of dedicated teachers, administrators, and parents who work tirelessly to educate our kids every single day. It's the ultimate expression of big government arrogance. We in Washington know best, and you little people are too stupid to figure things out on your own. 2. The civil rights boogeyman, fear-mongering and false alarms. Next up, we have the civil rights scare tactic. The left claims that without the watchful eye of the DOE's Office for Civil Rights, OCR, schools will revert to the days of segregation and rampant discrimination. It's as if they believe that the moment the DOE disappears, every school principal in America will suddenly transform into Bull Connor. This is pure, unadulterated fear-mongering. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is still the law of the land. The Department of Justice is still empowered to prosecute cases of discrimination. And, lest we forget, there are countless state and local laws that protect students from discrimination. The OCR, far from being a neutral arbiter of justice, has often been used as a tool to advance a radical woke agenda. They've launched investigations into schools over things like microaggressions, cultural appropriation, and the use of gendered pronouns. They've become the thought police of the education system, punishing anyone who dares to deviate from the approved leftist orthodoxy. They are more concerned with political correctness than actual discrimination. Trump, a man who believes in equality under the law and who, by the way, has a long history of hiring and promoting minorities, understands that true civil rights are about protecting everyone, not just a select few favored groups. 3. The unconstitutional power grab myth. Ignoring the art of the deal, yes, the constitutional argument. The Democrats and their media allies are clutching their pearls and screaming that Trump's executive order is an illegal power grab, a violation of the separation of powers, and a threat to the very foundations of our democracy. They conveniently forget that the Constitution also gives the president the power to propose legislation, to negotiate with Congress, and to use the bully pulpit to advance his agenda. Trump's executive order is not a decree. It's a negotiating tactic. It's a way of saying, hey, Congress, we have a problem. Let's work together to fix it. It's classic Trump, bold, unconventional, and designed to force action. He's not afraid to rattle cages, to challenge the status quo, and to use every tool at his disposal to achieve his goals. He's a deal maker, not a dictator. And in this case, he's trying to make a deal that will benefit all American students. It's called Leadership. 4. The swamp's death throes. The education establishment fights back, and, finally, we have the predictable outcry from the education establishment, the teachers' unions, the administrators' associations, and the army of bureaucrats who have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. These are the people who have been feeding at the federal trough for decades, the people who have built their careers and their empires on the backs of American taxpayers. They're not worried about the children. They're worried about their jobs, their pensions, and their power. They're the swamp creatures fighting tooth and nail to protect their territory. Chuck Schumer, that paragon of virtue and fiscal responsibility, calls Trump's plan devastating and cruel. The teachers' unions, those champions of educational excellence, are predicting the end of public education as we know it. The NAACP, that bastion of racial harmony, is calling it a dark day for America. It's all so predictable, so transparent, and so utterly pathetic. These are the death throes of a dying system. The desperate cries of those who know their gravy train is about to be derailed. The truth, it's about empowerment, not destruction. Truth is, the movement to abolish the Department of Education is not about destroying public education. It's about empowering it. It's about returning control to the people who know best. parents, teachers, and local communities. It's about freeing our schools from the suffocating grip of the federal bureaucracy and allowing them to innovate, to experiment, and to tailor their programs to the unique needs of their students. It's about restoring common sense, accountability, and a focus on actual learning, not woke indoctrination. It's about making American education great again. So, let the naysayers neigh, let the critics carp, let the establishment wail. The train has left the station, and it's not stopping until the Department of Education is nothing more than a footnote in history. Trump, the ultimate disruptor, is leading the charge, and he's not going to back down. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but the destination, a brighter future for our children, is worth every single jolt. The swamp is being drained, one bloated, useless federal agency at a time. Act V, the swamp fights back with lawyers, lawsuits, and legislative shenanigans. The extended, uncut Director's Commentary edition. All right, Patriots, let's dive deep into the murky swamp of legal and political maneuvering that surrounds Trump's audacious and brilliant, obviously plan to send the Department of Education packing. It's a tangled web of constitutional clauses, congressional procedures, activist lawsuits, and public opinion polls. A veritable feast for political junkies and a migraine for everyone else. The Constitutional Conundrum, a deep dive into the separation of powers, aka the blame game, the Constitution. That dusty old document that liberals love to, quote, selectively, is surprisingly clear on one thing. Congress holds the power of the purse. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, to be precise. For all you constitutional scholars out there, that means Congress, and only Congress, can create and fund or defund federal agencies. The Department of Education, as we've established, was birthed by the Department of Education Organization Act of 1979, a legislative love child of the Carter administration. So, logically, it takes another act of Congress to unbirth it. Trump's executive order, while a powerful statement of intent, is legally more like a strongly worded letter to Santa Claus. It expresses a wish, but it doesn't magically make the dough disappear. The anti-Trumpers, naturally, seized on this like a pack of wolves on a wounded elk. They screamed about executive overreach, abuse of power, and dictatorial tendencies. They conveniently forgot that Obama used executive orders like confetti at a parade, but hey, who's counting? We are. We're always counting. The reality is, Trump knows he needs Congress. He's not trying to bypass the Constitution. He's trying to use it. He's using the executive order as a battering ram, a way to force Congress to confront the issue, to have the debate, to take a vote. He's saying, I've done my part. Now, it's your turn. It's a classic Trump move, bold, provocative, and strategically brilliant. He's playing 5D chess while his opponents are playing tiddlywinks. 2. The Legislative Labyrinth, a detailed tour of the congressional sausage facturno. Let's venture into the heart of the beast, the United States Congress. It's a place where good ideas go to die, where lobbyists roam free, and where the only thing that gets done with any regularity is the naming of post offices. 2. Abolish the dough. A bill must pass both the House and the Senate and then be signed into law by the President, which, in this case, would be a rather enthusiastic signature, to say the least. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. The House, with its slightly larger Republican majority, might be relatively easy to navigate. There are already champions of the cause, like Representative Thomas Massie, who have been itching to dismantle the dough for years. But the Senate? The Senate. That's where things get really messy. The Senate is the graveyard of good intentions, the place where legislation goes to languish and die. The Republicans have a slim majority, but it's not filibuster-proof. The filibuster, that archaic Senate rule that allows a minority of senators to block a vote, is the Democrats' weapon of choice. They'll use it to delay, to obstruct, to tie the legislation up in knots. They'll give endless speeches about the importance of federal oversight, the need for equity, and the dire consequences of dismantling the dough. They'll bring in teachers, students, and maybe even a few trained SEALs to testify before committees. It'll be a political spectacle, a marathon of grandstanding and procedural maneuvering. And it could all come down to a handful of moderate senators. The Susan Collinses, the Lisa Murkowskis, the Mitt Romneys of the world. These are the swing votes, the wild cards, the people who hold the fate of the dough in their hands. The lobbying pressure on these senators will be intense. The special interests, the unions, the education establishment, they'll all be pulling out the stops to protect their turf. And even if by some miracle a bill does pass the Senate, it still has to go back to the House for reconciliation, and then to the president's desk. It's a legislative obstacle course, a gauntlet of political challenges. 3. The legal landmines, a comprehensive guide to the lawsuits and the lawyers who love them. As sure as the sun rises in the east, Trump's executive order was met with a barrage of lawsuits. It was like a legal feeding frenzy, with every left-leaning organization in the country scrambling to get a piece of the action. The NAACP predictably led the charge, claiming the order was unconstitutional. They seem to think everything Trump does is unconstitutional. A coalition of Democratic attorneys general, eager to score political points and burnish their resistance credentials, also filed suit. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and a host of other activist groups are lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce. Their arguments are predictable. The executive order exceeds the president's authority. It violates the separation of powers. It undermines the rights of students. And it's generally just a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad idea. These lawsuits will wind their way through the courts for years, possibly ending up before the Supreme Court. There will be temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions, appeals, and endless legal briefs filled with arcane jargon and convoluted arguments. It'll be a bonanza for lawyers who will bill their clients by the hour for the privilege of fighting the Trump administration. But here's the thing. Trump doesn't mind the lawsuits. In fact, he probably welcomes them. He knows that every legal challenge is an opportunity to expose the hypocrisy and the radical agenda of his opponents. He'll use the lawsuits as a platform to rally his base, to raise money, and to keep the issue in the headlines. He's a master of the media, and he knows how to turn even a negative story into a positive for his cause. 4. The court of public opinion. Gauging the mood of the American people and ignoring the fake news. And finally, we come to the ever-elusive public opinion. The polls, those notoriously unreliable snapshots of public sentiment, show that a majority of Americans don't support abolishing the Department of Education. But polls can be manipulated, and they often fail to capture the intensity of feeling on both sides of an issue. The anti-DOE movement is a grassroots phenomenon, fueled by the anger and frustration of parents who are fed up with the failing public school system. They're tired of the woke indoctrination, the low standards, and the lack of accountability. They're the silent majority that Trump tapped into in 2016, and they're still out there ready to be mobilized. Trump, the ultimate showman, knows how to connect with these voters. He'll hold rallies, he'll tweet up a storm, and he'll use every opportunity to hammer home his message. We need to get the federal government out of our schools and give control back to parents and local communities. He'll paint the Democrats as the defenders of the status quo, the protectors of a failed bureaucracy, and the enemies of educational freedom. He'll frame the debate as a choice between common sense and left-wing lunacy. And he'll do it with his trademark blend of humor, hyperbole, and unapologetic populism. The mainstream media, of course, will portray him as a monster, a demagogue, a threat to democracy. But Trump doesn't care. He's used to the negative press. He thrives on it. He knows that the more the media attacks him, the more his base loves him. The long and winding road. It's a marathon, not a sprint, so the battle to abolish the Department of Education is going to be a long, drawn-out, and fiercely contested affair. It's a political war with multiple fronts. The legal front, the legislative front, and the public opinion front. There will be victories and defeats, setbacks and advances. There will be moments of high drama and periods of grinding tedium. There will be heroes and villains, winners and losers. But one thing is certain. Trump is not going to give up. He's committed to this fight, and he's got the tenacity, the resources, and the support of millions of Americans to see it through. It may take years, it may require multiple legislative battles, and it may even end up before the Supreme Court. But in the end, the Department of Education's days are numbered. The swamp is being drained, slowly but surely, and the future of American education is hanging in the balance. It's a fight worth fighting, and Trump is leading the charge. The swamp will resist, but the people are rising. Act Vi. a history of whining, complaining, and failed attempts to kill the beast. So, you want the real history of the Department of Education? Not the sugar-coated, it's all for the children version you find in textbooks, but the real story filled with political posturing, bureaucratic bloat, and a surprising amount of conservative outrage. Buckle up, Buttercup, because it's going to be a bumpy ride. 1. The birth of a bureaucracy. Carter's Folly. 1979, 1980. Our story begins in the late 1970s, a time of disco, bell-bottoms, and questionable political decisions. Enter President Jimmy Carter, a peanut farmer turned politician who, for some inexplicable reason, decided that what America really needed was a brand new cabinet-level Department of Education. It was 1979, he signed it, and it opened its doors, officially in 1980. Now, to be fair, the federal government had dabbled in education before. There was even a short-lived Department of Education back in 1867, but it was quickly downgraded to an office, probably because everyone realized it. It was a terrible idea. But Carter, bless his heart, was determined to make it work. He claimed it would promote educational excellence and ensure equal opportunity. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The real reason for creating the DOE, of course, was political. Carter was trying to appease the teachers' unions, a powerful Democratic constituency. It was a classic case of political patronage, dressed up in the language of high-minded ideals. It was a payoff, pure and simple. And so, the Department of Education was born. A bureaucratic Frankenstein's monster stitched together from various existing federal programs and given a hefty budget to play with. 2. Reagan's Revolution that wasn't. The Gipper versus the DOE 1980s. Enter Ronald Reagan, the conservative hero, the man who promised to shrink government and get America back on track. Reagan, like Trump, saw the DOE for what it was, a bloated, inefficient, and unnecessary bureaucracy. During his 1980 campaign, Reagan vowed to abolish the DOE, calling it a waste and a symbol of federal overreach. It was music to the ears of conservatives who had been railing against the department since its inception. The 1980 Republican platform was very clear: get rid of it. But alas, even the mighty Reagan couldn't slay the bureaucratic beast. Despite his best efforts, the DOE survived. Why? Because Washington, D.C. is a swamp, and swamp creatures are notoriously difficult to kill. They have powerful friends, deep pockets, and an uncanny ability to survive even the most determined attacks. The DOE had already begun to weave its tentacles into the fabric of the American education system, dispensing grants, issuing regulations, and building a constituency of bureaucrats, educators, and special interest groups who depended on its continued existence. Reagan did manage to cut the DOE's budget and slow its growth, but he couldn't deliver the final blow. It was a victory of sorts, but not the total victory he had promised. 3. The Tea Party Tantrum, a renewed cry for abolishment to thousands in 2010s. Fast forward a few decades, the DOE is still around, bigger and more powerful than ever. But the conservative opposition hasn't gone away. In fact, it's gotten stronger. The rise of the Tea Party in the late 2000s brought a renewed focus on limited government and fiscal responsibility. And the DOE, that symbol of federal overreach and wasteful spending, was once again in the crosshairs. Tea Party activists railed against the DOE, calling it unconstitutional, ineffective, and a threat to local control of education. They organized protests, flooded town hall meetings, and demanded that their elected officials do something about it. Several Republican presidential candidates, eager to tap into this anti-establishment energy, echoed the call to abolish the DOE. It became a litmus test for conservative purity, a way to prove that you were really serious about shrinking government. But again, nothing happened. The DOE remained, stubbornly clinging to life like a cockroach in a nuclear apocalypse. 4. The Trump card, a new hope or a new headache, depending on your perspective. And that brings us to the present day, to the era of Trump. Like Reagan before him, Trump saw the DOE as a prime target for his drain the swamp agenda. He recognized it as a bloated, inefficient bureaucracy that was doing more harm than good to American education. But unlike Reagan, Trump is not a traditional politician. He's a disruptor, a brawler, a man who doesn't play by the rules. He's not afraid to take on the establishment, to challenge the status quo, and to use every tool at his disposal to achieve his goals. His executive order, while not a death blow in itself, is a significant escalation in the war against the dough. It's a clear signal that he's serious about this, that he's not going to back down, and that he's willing to fight dirty to win. The lessons of history: it ain't easy being abolitionisto. What does the history of the dough tell us? A few things. It's tough to kill a federal agency. Once a bureaucracy is created, it develops a life of its own. It builds a constituency, acquires power, and becomes incredibly resistant to change. Conservative opposition to the dough is nothing new. It's been a recurring theme in Republican politics for decades. Abolishing the dough is a political minefield. It requires navigating a complex web of legal challenges, congressional procedures, and public opinion battles. Trump is different. He's more willing to challenge the establishment and use unconventional tactics than his predecessors. The history is clear. Abolishing the Department of Education is a Herculean task. But if anyone can pull it off, it's probably Donald J. Trump. He's got the will, the motivation, and the sheer audacity to take on the swamp and win. It will not be quick. It won't be pretty, but it will be a fight worth watching. The swamp creatures are on notice. Their days may finally be numbered. The history books are being written, and this chapter is far from over. Act 7. The Doomsday Prophecies, and Why They're Probably Wrong. All right, folks, it's time to address the elephant in the room, or more accurately, the donkey in the room. Since we're talking about the Democrats' reaction, what's going to happen to all those vital education programs if the dough goes the way of the dinosaur? Will the sky fall? Will students roam the streets, uneducated and uncivilized? Will teachers spontaneously combust? The short answer? Probably not. The long answer: it's complicated, but let's break it down, program by program, and separate the facts from the fear. 1. Pell Grants and federal financial aid. The sky isn't falling, but your tuition bill might still be high. The Chicken Littles of the left are screaming that dismantling the dough will mean the end. Of Pell Grants and federal student aid, they paint a picture of millions of students suddenly unable to afford college, forced to abandon their dreams and become, gasp, productive members of society. Hold on a second. Trump specifically said that Pell Grants would be preserved. He's not an idiot. He knows that cutting off financial aid would be political suicide. It would also be incredibly stupid. The real question is how these programs would be administered. The likely scenario is that they'd be transferred to another agency, like the Treasury Department, which, already handles money. Could there be some hiccups in the transition? Sure. Anytime you move a massive bureaucracy, there's bound to be some paperwork snafus and delays, but the idea that students will suddenly be left high and dry is simply ridiculous. It is fear-mongering, plain and simple. The bigger issue, frankly, is the out-of-control cost of college tuition, which has been skyrocketing for decades under the DOE's watch. Maybe, just maybe, getting the federal government out of the student loan business would force colleges to get their financial houses in order. Maybe, too, Title I funding. The poor schools panic. Next up, we have Title I, the program that provides funding to schools with high concentrations of low-income students. The left is wailing that abolishing the dough will mean starving these schools of vital resources, leading to teacher layoffs, overcrowded classrooms, and a general decline in educational quality. Again, Trump has said that Title I funding will be preserved. The likely mechanism would be block grants to the states, giving them more flexibility in how they spend the money. Now, the critics argue that block grants are a recipe for disaster, that states will divert the money to other purposes, leaving poor schools in the lurch. But that's a cynical view of state governments. Many states already prioritize education, and they're perfectly capable of managing federal funds responsibly. And states that do mismanage the funds, well, they'll have to answer to their voters. That's called accountability, something the federal government is notoriously lacking. And, let's be honest, Title I hasn't exactly been a roaring success. Despite billions of dollars in spending, the achievement gap between rich and poor students remains stubbornly wide. Maybe it's time to try a different approach. 3. IDEA, the Special Education. Scare the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act idea is another sacred cow of the education establishment. It mandates that students with disabilities receive a free and appropriate public education. The left claims that abolishing the DOE will gut idea, leaving these vulnerable students without the support they need. Once again, Trump has said that funding for special education will be protected. The real issue is enforcement. Currently, the DOE's Office for Civil Rights is responsible for ensuring that schools comply with IDEA. If the DOE is abolished, that responsibility would likely shift to the Department of Justice or another agency. Could there be some growing pains? Sure. But the idea that the federal government will suddenly abandon students with disabilities is absurd. It's just another scare tactic designed to drum up opposition to Trump's plan. The laws are still on the books for the everything else apocalypse. The kitchen sink of fear. Then there's the laundry list of other programs that the left claims will be decimated by the DOE's demise. Vocational education, adult learning, rural schools, after-school programs, the federal work-study program, even the McKinney-Vento program for homeless students. It's like they're throwing everything at the wall, hoping something will stick. They're trying to create a sense of panic, to make people believe that abolishing the DOE will mean the end of education as we know it. But let's be realistic. Many of these programs are relatively small, and many are already administered at the state and local level. The federal government's role is often limited to providing funding and setting broad guidelines. Could some programs be cut or eliminated? Possibly. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Not every federal program is essential, and some are downright wasteful. It's time for a thorough review of these programs to determine which ones are actually working and which ones are just adding to the bureaucratic bloat. The big picture, it's about streamlining, not destroying. Bottom line is this: Trump's plan to abolish the Department of Education is not about destroying public education. It's about streamlining it, decentralizing it, and making it more accountable to parents and local communities. It's about getting the federal government out of the business of micromanaging our schools and letting states and local districts decide what's best for their students. It's about empowering teachers, trusting parents, and focusing on results, not regulations. Will there be challenges? Absolutely. Any major change involves some risk and uncertainty. But the potential benefits, a more efficient, more effective, and more responsive education system, are well worth the effort. So, let the left wail and gnash their teeth. Let them predict doom and gloom. Let them cling to their outdated big government ideology. The train has left the station, and it's headed towards a future where education is controlled by the people, not by Washington bureaucrats. It's a future of freedom, choice, and accountability. And it's a future that's long overdue. The dough is on the chopping block, and the smart money is on Trump. Act 8. The final showdown? Or maybe just a really long, drawn-out political soap opera. So, will Trump actually succeed in killing off the Department of Education? Will he ride into the sunset a victorious hero, having slain the bureaucratic beast? Or will he be left tilting at windmills, like a modern-day Don Quixote, his dreams of educational freedom dashed against the rocks of political reality? Let's break down the odds, the obstacles, and the potential outcomes, shall we? 1. The Congressional Gauntlet, a numbers game, and a lot of arm-twisting. The first and biggest hurdle is Congress. As we've established, only Congress can officially abolish a cabinet-level department, and Congress, as we all know, is a dysfunctional mess. The Republicans have a slim majority in both the House and the Senate, but it's not a unified majority. There are plenty of moderate Republicans, Rhinos, Republicans, in name only, as Trump would call them, who are squishy on the whole abolish the DOE thing. They might worry about losing federal funding for their states or about alienating teachers and parents. They are WEATHERVAN. The Democrats, on the other hand, are united in their opposition. They'll fight this tooth and nail using every procedural trick in the book to delay, obstruct, and ultimately kill any legislation that threatens the DOE. They'll filibuster, they'll grandstand, they'll hold endless hearings featuring tearful testimonials from every student who's ever benefited from a federal education program, which, let's be honest, is pretty much every student. To overcome a Democratic filibuster in the Senate, you need 60 votes. That's a supermajority, folks. And in the current political climate, getting 60 senators to agree on anything is like herding cats on roller skates. It's possible, but it's not likely. The 2023 House vote, where a majority of Republicans joined Democrats to oppose abolishing the DOE, is a pretty good indication of the uphill battle Trump faces. It's like trying to climb Mount Everest in flip-flops. 2. The public opinion puzzle, winning hearts and minds, or at least 51% of them. Then there's the pesky problem of public opinion. The polls consistently show that most Americans don't support abolishing the Department of Education. They may not love the DOE, but they're wary of rocking the boat. They worry about losing federal funding, about disrupting their children's education, and about the general chaos that could ensue. But polls aren't everything. Trump has defied the polls before. Remember 2016? He's a master of persuasion, a showman, a salesman. He knows how to tap into the anxieties and frustrations of ordinary Americans, and he's not afraid to use populist rhetoric to rally his base. He'll frame the debate as a fight between the people and the swamp, between local control and federal overreach, between common sense and left-wing lunacy. He'll hold rallies, he'll tweet up a storm, and he'll use every opportunity to hammer home his message. Will it work? Maybe, maybe not. But one thing's for sure, it won't be boring. 3. The legal labyrinth. Death by 1,000 paper cuts of in if Trump somehow manages to navigate the congressional minefield and get a bill passed, he'll still have to face the legal challenges. The lawsuits are already piling up, and they're likely to drag on for years. The courts could issue injunctions blocking the implementation of the law. They could rule that the executive order is unconstitutional. They could tie the whole thing up in legal knots for so long that Trump is out of office before anything actually happens. But again, Trump loves a good fight. He'll use the lawsuits to his advantage, portraying himself as a victim of the deep state and the radical left. He'll rally his base, raise money, and keep the issue in the headlines. For the kicking and screaming option, death by 1,000 cuts. Even if Trump can't abolish the DOE outright, he can still do a lot to weaken it. He can cut its budget, slash its staff, and limit its authority through executive orders and regulatory changes. He can appoint people to key positions who are hostile to the department's mission. He can make its life so miserable that it effectively ceases to function. It won't be a clean kill, but it could be a slow, painful death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's the starve the beast strategy, and it's been used effectively by conservatives. In the past, 5 future scenarios. So how is the future going to unfold? Scenario 1. Full abolishment, unlikely, but not impossible. Trump somehow manages to pull a rabbit out of his hat, convinces enough Republicans to get on board, and pushes a bill through Congress. The DOE is officially dismantled, and its functions are transferred to other agencies or to the states. It's a huge victory for Trump and a major blow to the education establishment. Scenario 2. Death by 1,000 cuts more likely. Trump fails to get a bill through Congress, but he uses his executive authority to cripple the DOE, cutting its budget, reducing its staff, and limiting its power. The DOE still exists, but it's a shadow of its former self. Scenario 3. The zombie DOE, also likely. The DOE survives, but it's constantly under attack. It's caught in a perpetual state of political limbo, with its funding and authority constantly being debated and challenged. It's like a zombie, not quite dead, but not really alive either. Scenario 4. The status quo, sadly. Possible. Despite all the sound and fury, nothing really changes. The DOE continues to exist, more or less as it is, a monument to bureaucratic inertia and political gridlock. The final verdict? It's a long shot. But never bet against Trump, so what's the most likely outcome? Honestly, it's a toss-up. The odds are stacked against Trump, but he's defied the odds before. He's a political force of nature, and he's not afraid to fight dirty. The battle over the Department of Education is a microcosm of the larger struggle over the role of government in American life. It's a fight between those who believe in centralized power and those who believe in local control, between those who trust the experts and those who trust the people. It's a fight that's been going on for decades, and it's not going to be resolved anytime soon. But Trump has reignited the debate, and he's forced the issue into the public consciousness. Win or lose, he's already made a difference. The swamp is on notice. The fight is on. and the future of American education is hanging in the balance. It's going to be a wild ride, folks, so buckle up and enjoy the show. The smart money says the dough won't disappear tomorrow, but the pressure is on and change is in the air. Trump may not get everything he wants, but he's certainly going to make things interesting, and that, in itself, is a victory. Act 9. The final verdict, or how I learned to stop worrying and love the bureaucratic apocalypse. So, we've reached the end of our journey, folks. We've explored the arguments for and against abolishing the Department of Education. We've navigated the treacherous waters of Washington politics, and we've witnessed the epic clash between Trump, the swamp drainer, and the bureaucratic behemoth. What's the final verdict? Will the dough be consigned to the dustbin of history, a relic of a bygone era of big government and federal overreach? Or will it survive, battered and bruised, but still clinging to life, a testament to the enduring power of the status quo? Here's the truth. Nobody knows for sure. Politics is a messy, unpredictable business, and anything can happen. But we can make some educated guesses based on the evidence we've gathered. The case for optimism, aka why Trump might actually win this thing. Trump is a force of nature. Let's face it, the man is a political phenomenon. He's defied the odds before, he's broken all the rules, and he's shown a remarkable ability to get what he wants. He's not afraid to fight dirty, he's not afraid to offend people, and he's not afraid to use every tool at his disposal to achieve his goals. The grassroots movement is real. The anti-dough sentiment is not just some fringe conspiracy theory. It's a genuine grassroots movement fueled by the frustration of parents and taxpayers who are fed up with the failing public school system. These people are motivated, they're organized, and they're ready to fight. The swamp is vulnerable. It is a bloated, inefficient bureaucracy, and it's made plenty of enemies over the years. Even some Democrats are starting to question its effectiveness. The time may be ripe for a major shakeup. Momentum is on Trump's side. Even if he can't abolish the dough outright, he can still do a lot to weaken it, to cut its budget, to limit its authority, and to make its life miserable. He's already started down that path, and he's not likely to stop. The case for pessimism, aka why the swamp might survive. Congress is a black hole. Getting anything done in Congress is like pulling teeth from a rabid alligator. The Democrats will fight tooth and nail to protect the dough, and even some Republicans are lukewarm on the idea of abolishing it. The courts are unpredictable. The legal challenges to Trump's executive order could drag on for years, and there's no guarantee that the courts will rule in his favor. Public opinion is a fickle mistress. While there's a strong anti-dough sentiment among conservatives, the broader public is more ambivalent. The Democrats and the media will do everything they can to portray Trump's plan as a disaster for education. The bureaucracy is a survivor. Federal agencies are notoriously difficult to kill. They have a knack for surviving even the most determined attacks, like cockroaches in a nuclear apocalypse. The likely outcome, a messy, protracted, and ultimately inconclusive battle. So, what's the most likely outcome? Probably a combination of all of the above. Trump will continue to fight for the abolition of the dough, but he'll likely face stiff resistance from Congress, the courts, and the media. He might succeed in weakening the department, in cutting its budget, and in limiting its authority. He might even manage to transfer some of its functions to other agencies or to the states, but a complete and total dismantling of the dough, that's a long shot. It's more likely that the department will survive in some form or another, but it will be a shadow of its former self. It'll be constantly under attack. Its funding will be perpetually threatened, and its authority will be continually challenged. It'll be a messy, protracted, and ultimately inconclusive battle. It'll be like a long, drawn-out divorce, with both sides fighting over custody of the children, in this case, the nation's students. The final word. It's about more than just the doughbot. Here's the important thing to remember. This fight is about more than just the Department of Education. It's about the future of American education. It's about the role of government in our lives. It's about the balance of power between the federal government and the states. It's a fight that's been going on for decades, and it's not going to be resolved anytime soon. But Trump has forced the issue. He's started the conversation, and he's energized a movement that's not going to go away quietly. Whether he succeeds or fails in abolishing the dough, He's already made a difference. He's challenged the status quo, he's shaken up the establishment, and he's given voice to millions of Americans who are fed up with the failing public school system. So, buckle up, folks. The ride's not over yet. The battle for the future of American education is just beginning. And whatever happens, it's going to be one heck of a show. The swamp is on notice, and the people are watching. The Department of Education may or may not survive, but the fight for educational freedom will continue. And that, in itself, is a victory. The fight will go on, and the spirit of reform, championed by Trump, will continue to challenge the entrenched interests of the education establishment. Wow, what a story! The fight over the Department of Education is clearly far from over, and it's a great example of how complex and fascinating American politics can be. I hope you learned a lot, both about the issues and about the English language. If you found this video helpful, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with anyone who might be interested, and subscribing to Story Driven English for more content that brings English learning to life. We'll see you in the next video.